Kant knows nothing. Not literally, though. Hey, nerds. So, I've been talking about the Cambridge Companion to Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. So, in this, the 1700s Enlightenment philosophers' views on metaphysics are explained. Of course, these, like one of the most famous philosophers of all time. And Kant had an on again, off again relationship with metaphysics. Metaphysics is basically the study and speculation about the cosmic nature and structure of the universe. Kant had a hard on for his grand philosophical system that supposedly tells us the true nature of the structure and function of the universe. He retconned his previous brutal take. Oh, wait, sorry, I skipped something there. He claimed to have found a universally accepted standard for knowledge. So he retconned his previous brutal takedown of metaphysics and said that it was merely necessarily skepticism for making his philosophical system work. Kant decided that the foundation of his metaphysics was morality. He just needed a method. He wanted to determine the proper ends and limits of human desires and power, but he still hadn't found his method yet. Kant sketched out what he called the science of the limits of human reason. Can Kant find the method for his metaphysics of morals that will show us the science of the limits of human reason, power, and desire? So, that's a little background, and let me get into this section of the Cambridge Companion to Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. So, he gets into they get into his idea of the transcendental aesthetic here. Remember, transcendental is different from transcendent. It's, I mean, like, if I remember correctly, to oversimplify, it's almost like more transcendent than transcendent. Like, transcendent is possible to reach, but transcendental is not possible to reach. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with God or anything like that, as you might think from the word transcendent. It just means the like it's sort of a contrast in relation to Plato's forms, like there being this transcendent perfect form, but there's something even more perfect than that than we can ever access, whereas we can access something transcendent, so like a transcendent idea or something like that. So anyway, the claim and the aesthetic, to oversimplify too, is, a lot of people get that it's like the philosophy of how things appear to us, not necessarily like the color of this or anything like that, but it gets into that specifically as well. Anyway, the claim of Kant's aesthetic is that space and time are a priori intuitions. I mentioned that many times before. I mean, it's essentially a faith claim. It's taking something as granted without having to form a justifiable argument for that. So, knowledge is called a priori if it is independent of experience and even of all impressions of the senses. Kant is not very precise about what this independence consists in. In the case of a priori judgments, it seems clear that being a priori implies that no particular facts verified by experience and observation are to be appealed to in their justification. Kant holds that necessity and universality are criteria of a priority in judgment, and clearly this depends on the claim that the appeal to the facts of experience could not justify a judgment made as necessary and universal. So we can't find necessary and universal a priori assumptions about morality and human knowledge being the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals and the science of the limits of human reason. Um, so because Kant is quite consistent about what propositions and very way too fucking detailed, if you read Critique to Pure Reason, it's just endlessly way too fucking detailed. Anyway, because he's quite consistent about what propositions he regards as a priori and about how he characterizes the notion, the absence of a more precise explanation of a priori has not led to its being regarded in commentary on Kant as one of his more problematic notions. So the his apparently vague explanation, even though like he doesn't get into the details enough of it, he gets into really a lot of details, but not the relevant details to how he would prove his argument about justifying what would make an a priori in terms of his overarching argument and philosophical system. So that apparently did not lead to Kant being one of more problematic notions, even though a reader of today would be prepared at least to entertain the idea that the notion of a priori knowledge is either hopelessly unclear or vacuous. So that's good because it gets into another section of the book itself that gets into more specific details here, and then we'll talk about more criticisms of Kant. So, in Kant's Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics, which came out after his critique of pure reason, uh, we saw that in his early letter he talks about that they talk about in this book about Kant's early letters suggested that the critique would provide the foundations for both theoretical and practical philosophy, but that by the time of his second letter, it looks as if he has trimmed back his ambitions and intends to accomplish only the twofold objective of both establishing and limiting the source of a priori knowledge, which we were talking about a lot there, obviously, right? In fact, the critique as finally published focuses on the two goals of establishing that we do have a priori knowledge. So we focuses on proving that we do. But his argument to justify what a priori is and proves that he is, and proves that he uses to prove that there are a prioris is not a sufficient enough explanation, basically. So he attempts to establish at least that we do have a priori knowledge of the most general laws of nature coming from the structure of our own minds, and of limiting the validity of such knowledge to the realm of objects that we can actually experience. So if we're talking about a priori knowledge, we can have a priori knowledge in our minds of universal general laws of nature due to the structure of our own minds. But this does not necessarily establish the first principles of morality to Kant, although it comes close to that. So, this in the end would be left to subsequent works. He couldn't even get to this in one book. He had to write a whole other book about it after that. So, as of subsequent works, the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, and then his second critique after the critique of pure reason and the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals was the critique of practical reason. So he critiqued pure reason, then laid out his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, then critiqued practical reason. So he uses his critiques of pure and practical reason to lay out his philosophical system for the groundwork, uh, with a prioris leading to his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. So the critique of practical, after the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals and the critique of practical reason, he wanted to at least carve out the conceptual space for a moral philosophy that, in certain key ways, would not be limited by what seem to be some obvious facts about human nature, the extent to which our behavior is driven by contingent desires, and even by the results of theoretical philosophy itself, the ubiquity of causal determinism in nature. So remember what he says in terms of determinism there, because we get to that in a little bit more here in terms of criticisms of Kant. So I'm just reading these few things from Wikipedia here in terms of criticisms on Kant, and who's one specific criticisms from a specific philosopher on Kant. So according to many philosophers, Immanuel Kant is considered wrong on reason and knowledge to a certain extent because he overemphasized the role of the mind in shaping our perception of reality, essentially arguing that we can only ever know things as they appear to us, phenomena, and not things in themselves, noumena, which limits the potential for true objective knowledge and can be seen as underestimating the capacity of sensory experience to provide information about the world. Underestimating the capacity of sensory experience to provide information about the world is interesting, because remember the other day I made another video about John Locke's view on empiricism and his idea that we gain all of our knowledge about the world from sense experience. So to me, he exaggerates the capacity of sensory experience to provide information about the world, and to other philosophers, uh, Kant does not go far enough in terms of our capacity of sensory experience to provide information about the world. And one philosopher who's very well known for criticizing Kant is Schopenhauer, who's of course the probably the most famous pessimist. I've only read so far his book on pessimism, but I want to get to into more of his work, especially the book that is mentioned here. Um, he wrote a whole book that's in the criticism of Kant called The World as Will and Representation. So Schopenhauer claimed that Kant uh, represented object is false. The true distinction is only between the representation of the thing in itself. For Schopenhauer, the law of causality, which relates only to the representation and not to the thing in itself, is the real and only form of the understanding. So remember, Kant says, according to determinism, means we can learn the thing in itself, and we can learn the thing and then the thing in itself. And so he's relying on his system in order to figure out what the thing is it itself is, and use that as part of his foundation for the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, which he creates in response to his criticism of pure and practical reason. So he let me reiterate here, because he's going to talk about the thing in itself as well. So so oh, right, sorry. Schopenhauer here. So, remember, other philosophers argue uh, that we can never know things as they appeared in us, and not. Oh, sorry. Kant said we can only ever know things as they appear to us, the phenomena, and not things in themselves. So we can know things as they appear to us, but not things in themselves. So what Schopenhauer says, though, is due to the law of causality, which is not the same as determinism. Kant claims he's right based on determinism, partially anyway, and Schopenhauer claims that Kant is wrong based on causality. So you could say that based on causality, Kant claims that he's right, and based on causality, Schopenhauer claims that Kant is wrong. So so basically, we're talking about the thing and the thing in itself, right? So Schopenhauer claimed that Kant's represented object and it's false. So the thing, not the thing in itself. The true distinction is only between the representation and the thing in itself. So we have a representation, and then we have the representation to between us and the thing in itself. But there's no way of the representation going to the thing and then to the thing in itself. And the thing in itself, if I remember correctly, is transcendental. So we can access the thing, but not the thing in itself. But to Schopenhauer, there is no thing in between the thing and itself. When we experience a thing, we just experience the thing in itself. It's not transcendental and inaccessible. The thing in itself is just the thing. So we notice the thing. Therefore, we can know universe. We To Schopenhauer at least, we can learn universal knowledge, because knowledge and ideas are not transcendental. They're merely, like, I mean, Schopenhauer might have even said that they're material, although don't quote me on that. But so the point is that Kant has this really complex philosophical system about that he lays out in his critique of pure reason and critique of practical reason. And he uses his critiques to lay out his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. And his philosophical system, he says, there's our minds, and then the thing, and then the thing in itself. But other philosophers claim that, and he says that this is due to our lack of capacity for learning knowledge through sense perception. But other philosophers claim that he underestimates the power of sense perception, which means that his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals is baseless due to his underestimation of lack of sensory perception to give us knowledge, and due to him mistakenly thinking that there's a thing and the thing in itself, and we can know the thing but we can never know the thing in itself. But according to Schopenhauer and other philosophers, Kant is wrong because he underestimates the power of our sensory experience to give us knowledge, and we actually see the thing in itself and we just know what it is. There isn't a thing and a transcendental thing in itself. So Kant doesn't know nothing, but it seems like, as often happens with philosophers, especially ones like Kant, he gets his thoughts are so complex that he goes on into these convoluted rabbit holes that rationalize his own preconceptions. And I don't know, I think Kant might be right about the thing in itself, actually, but I'm not a Kantian. But anyway, to other philosophers, this is all why Kant's system of knowledge, based on his criticism of pure and practical reason and his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, is baseless because he actually knows nothing about reason and metaphysics of morals. Therefore, Kant thinks that he has knowledge, but he actually